Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. For those of you who may be new to our Facebook Live discussions, I'm Congresswoman Lori Trahan. And over the past several months, I've been hosting discussions like the one we're about to have on a wide array of issues important to folks across the 3rd District. These discussions are designed to arm you and your family with information from trusted experts about the pandemic and the economic fallout from it. If you've joined one of our previous telephone town halls or watched or read any major news outlet reporting on COVID, then there is a very good chance that you'll recognize our distinguished guest today, Dr. Ashish Jha. It's wonderful to have him once again share his insight and the latest news about the public health response, including the new vaccine for COVID-19, as well as what we can expect in the coming weeks and months. As many of you know, the Food and Drug Administration recently approved the Pfizer vaccine for emergency use. And as of Monday, frontline medical workers and the most vulnerable in our communities have already started to get vaccinated. I'd be remiss if I didn't take a moment to commend the workers at Pfizer's facility here in the 3rd District at Andover. They've been working around the clock to help get us to this point. So thank you for everything you've done and continue to do. The FDA is also considering an emergency use authorization for another company with Bay State ties, Moderna. Headquartered in Cambridge, Moderna's vaccine should receive a decision from the FDA about a possible emergency use authorization status any day now. Now, I've been getting a lot of questions over the past couple of weeks about how the FDA can be sure that these vaccines are going to be safe after being developed under these unprecedented timelines, as well as what the current distribution plan means for us here in Massachusetts. Everyone is wondering when we'll be able to return to something that feels familiar and normal. Now, I'm no expert on infectious diseases, nor am I a physician, but we're fortunate to have one of the best there is, someone I'm proud to call a friend with us today. He's here to answer some of the most frequently asked questions about the vaccine and what all of the recent developments mean for communities here in the Commonwealth. So without further ado, I'll introduce our expert guest. Dr. Jha is the Dean of Brown University School of Public Health and a practicing physician recognized globally for his groundbreaking research on Ebola and as an expert on pandemic preparedness and response, as well as on health policy research and practice. Before becoming Dean of the School of Public Health at Brown in September, Dr. Jha was the director of the Harvard Global Health Institute, the KT Lee Professor of Global Health at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, and a general internist at the West Roxbury VA. Today, Dr. Jha is leading the charge on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic, advising federal and state policymakers on our response, while also leading national and international analysis of key issues that have emerged as a result of the outbreak. Dr. Jha, thank you so much for being here.
Congresswoman, thank you for having me back. I always love being on with you and love the questions that people in your district throw at us. So I'm excited to be here.
Well, everyone's craving answers, and I know we don't have you for too long, so let's jump right into the questions. You know, we've been hearing a lot of concerns about how quickly these vaccines were developed and their authorization for emergency approval by the FDA. And I think it would be helpful to understand what this entire process entails. Would you mind just explaining the steps that companies like Pfizer and Moderna have to take to get these approved and what the FDA is looking at and weighing when they consider approving emergency usage of these vaccines?
Yes, absolutely. And this is a question that I get a lot. People say, well, how, if a typical vaccine might take 3 or 5 years to develop, how did we do this so fast? And did we cut any corners? I'll give you the short answer. The answer is we did not cut any corners, but let's talk about what a typical development process might be. Might be somebody comes up with a vaccine idea. We might go test it in animals first. Then you have to start human trials. There are 3 phases of human trials. Each of them is expensive, takes a long time to recruit, and it ends up taking, as I said, 3 to 5 years for a typical vaccine, sometimes longer. Yeah. Now, why we were able to do this so much faster, so if you think about it, human trials and 3 phases of clinical trials, we did all of them. There was not a single step that was skipped. In fact, the phase 3 clinical trial that we've done for the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine are these huge trials that would take years to recruit people. But because we've had so much volunteer effort of people who are willing to be recruited for these clinical trials, who signed up for the clinical trials, we were able to recruit people very, very quickly. That made a huge difference on timing. And so these clinical trials that we have done are actually bigger than most of the clinical trials from most vaccines. So we have more data going into this than most. And then of course, FDA has made this priority number one for review. So a typical, you put in an application, 6 months later, FDA might review it, get back to you. None of that is happening here, right? The moment the application went in, 150 FDA staff working 24/7, reviewing all the data to get us to an authorization. So the good news here is every single safety check has been there. We've done them. It's been done well. I have to tell you, I cannot believe how well these vaccines are turning out in terms of both safety and effectiveness. Yeah. We've gone fast because it's an emergency and we want to go fast.
Well, that's definitely reassuring to hear you describe the expedited timeline. And, you know, so many of us have seen the photos and watched the videos of nurses and doctors getting vaccinated already this week. I mean, it's so uplifting to see our heroes on the front lines get the vaccine. And many are just wondering what the timeline is going to be for the distribution on a massive scale. Who will have access to the vaccine after our frontline workers? Governor Baker has estimated that vaccines will tentatively be available to the general public starting in April. Can you just explain why it's so important that we prioritize different groups having access earlier than others, and what challenges we could experience in the coming weeks and months when it comes to the distribution of the vaccine?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, I believe that by next week, we'll have 2 vaccines. I do think the Moderna vaccine is going to get an authorization from the FDA. Don't know for sure, but that's my expectation because the data looks really good. And what will happen is for the rest of December and into probably the first half of January, it's going to be healthcare workers and it's going to be nursing home or long-term care facility residents and workers. Why those 2 healthcare workers? We need them safe and protected. And we also want to make sure they don't spread it to other people. And then obviously long-term care facilities are where so many of the deaths have happened. And in order to save lives, I think prioritizing them is really important. Then the bucket sort of opens up a bit more. We go to other essential workers, frontline folks, police officers, EMTs, firefighters, other essential workers, and then also other high-risk individuals, people who are older, with chronic diseases. Every state is going to make these decisions a little bit differently, but the goal will be to try to get both essential workers and high-risk individuals. A, you're trying to slow the spread. B, you're trying to protect lives, and you want to try to do both. My take is those groups get us well into February, probably into early March. These companies are making as much vaccine as they can, but they can only go so fast. And we want to make sure, obviously, we're doing it well. There is a bit of a game changer possibility here, which is there are 2 other vaccines, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, which will probably get reviewed by the FDA in the second half of January. If those go well, let's say the data looks good and they get approved, then we actually may have 4 vaccines as we head into February or March. And then I can imagine the general public having access to vaccines, possibly by the end of March. So somewhere between end of March and end of April is when I think people at normal risk would be able to get the vaccine. Earlier end, if we have more vaccines, obviously later end, if those 2 new ones don't end up coming online.
Wow. Well, then we all know what we should be, wishing for when we have the opportunity. And there's, always take this as an opportunity to say that we're not out of the woods just because folks are in the process of taking the vaccine, and still, the most important thing that we can do for our medical professionals who are serving on the front line tirelessly is to continue doing what we have been doing since March. And that's wearing the mask, staying socially distant, washing our hands, staying home when possible. It's so important until until we actually do round the corner and put this behind us. Dr. Jha, you testified before the House Education and Labor Committee a few months back. And when I had the opportunity to ask you questions, we discussed the dangers of misinformation and disinformation campaigns surrounding COVID-19. Now it seems like similar attempts to spread disinformation about the virus are teaming up with the anti-vaccine movement. That's led some to make preposterous claims about other tried and tested vaccines like flu shots and polio vaccines. I think folks would appreciate hearing from you about some of the most common false claims about vaccines and what we should all be wary of when we're seeing those claims on our social media feeds.
Absolutely. So let's start off a bit just talking about more generally why vaccines kind of engender this kind of stuff. Obviously, we always want to be extra careful with vaccines because we're giving vaccines to healthy people. And because we give vaccines to healthy people, the scientific process by which we develop vaccines actually has to meet a much, much higher bar than the development of regular therapies, because we're giving it to healthy people, we're giving it to children. And so the rigorousness with which scientific, kind of development of vaccines happens is unlike anything else we do. Just the sheer level of review, the examination of the data. And vaccines have been life-saving. I mean, they really are. If you think about all the childhood illnesses we don't talk about polio, and we don't talk about measles very much. We only talk about it when vaccination rates fall below a certain level. So vaccines work, and they're incredibly helpful. And I, of course, have always gotten my children vaccinated along the vaccination schedule. The problem is anytime there's a new vaccine, there's a small group of people who, for whatever reason, their anxiety, their issues, like to try to stir up a lot of confusion. I've been getting a lot of confusing messages and questions about, is the mRNA vaccine, these Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, are they going to somehow reprogram your genetic code? So let me tell you about the mRNA, the little bit of genetic material that goes in the vaccine. Any one of your cells makes 5,000 to 7,000 of these mRNAs at any given moment. These are ubiquitous throughout your entire body. It's how your body translates its genetic code into proteins. This is not going to get into your genetic code. It can't. These mRNA things that are going into the vaccine for short periods of time will get your body to make a protein that will elicit an immune response. That's all it's doing. And we've seen it now from the data. It's very, very safe. These were developed by scientists here at NIH, in Germany. Like these are all, the Pfizer vaccine, the main scientific work was done in Germany. The Moderna vaccine was done right here in Cambridge by scientists that. And so I am looking at the data. I find it exceedingly safe. And my general approach to people who come up with these kind of theories of, is this going to do some harm, or is it there's some nefarious agenda, is to just talk to people openly and honestly about what we know and what we don't know. And I feel personally very confident about these vaccines. I plan to get vaccinated as soon as it's my turn. I have planned to get my elderly parents vaccinated. And I encourage all of you, when it's your turn, to get vaccinated.
Yes, and I think that's a very important message, and I'm sure part of, a campaign, as we head into the next phases, is get your parents vaccinated. I know that my parents, we haven't spent a holiday with them since March, and this Christmas is, especially tough, I think, for families, and so they'll be, first in line when it's their turn, and I will too with my children. So. We obviously have so much work ahead of us to make sure that everyone has access to the vaccine. And there's no question that it will continue to require partnerships at the federal, state, and local levels. As you know, we're still in the thick of negotiations over additional relief, although I just landed in Washington and hope to be voting on this package very soon. I'm a firm believer that additional federal funding for vaccine distribution should be part of the final package, and it looks as though it is. But more than that, we also need to reach a resolution that delivers additional aid to local governments so that they can do their part to help get people vaccinated, much like they currently do with flu shots. Can you speak to the importance of continued federal investments in vaccine distribution, but also in empowering our local governments to make it as easy as possible for folks to get the vaccine once it is widely available?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think federal relief right now is actually pretty critical in lots of different ways. You see governors and mayors having to make these very difficult choices of what do they do with businesses, and can they afford to shut down businesses because infection levels are so high. But if they shut down those businesses, workers and small business owners lose their livelihoods. Again, I think that's the kind of place where we need Congress to step in. One of the key things people need to understand is we're not going to be in this very difficult period forever. Really, the next 6 to 8 weeks are going to be the hardest weeks of the pandemic. Things will start getting better as we get into February and March. We need to really make sure we're providing relief for the next 3-4 months. And then things will really kind of start getting back to much more of a sense of normal. In terms of funding for vaccine distribution, I mean, my gosh, if you think about all the incredible work that's gone on, you know, the old line that I like to say is, you know, vaccines don't save lives, vaccinations do. The scientists have built the vaccines. That's great. Now we got to figure out how to get it into people's arms. Right. It's a huge logistical challenge. At the federal level, certainly, but states, they get the vaccine, they've got to get it out to CVS's and Walmarts and Walgreens and all these other places and doctors' offices. And there's a ton of work that needs to go into that. We have to put together a campaign to educate people. Like, this is not the stuff to skimp on, right? Like, we've got to spend the money to make sure that happens, because that's how we save lives, and that's how we get our economy back. So I think it's an incredibly important investment that will pay for itself, you know, many hundreds of times over. And I'm glad to see Congress doing it.
Yes, there's no question that everybody wants to talk about stimulus and recovery, but the path to that is containing and getting vaccinated and coming out of the woods, if you will. You know, Dr. Jha, that was my last question, and it's so great, you know, to have you as an expert answering these tough, thorny questions for folks who are tuning in. But if you feel like there's anything else that we haven't discussed yet today that folks should know, I want to be sure to give you the opportunity before we end our precious moment with you.
Well, let me just take a minute to talk about this moment we're in, Congresswoman. We are heading into the holidays. This is obviously a really important and special time of the year for everybody, no matter which faith you are, what you celebrate. This is a really, really important moment. And we usually tend to spend these days with our families, our extended families and our friends. And just like Thanksgiving, I am again foregoing the opportunity to spend the holidays with my elderly parents and my brother and my extended family, and same on my wife's side. And we're doing this because things are really bad right now in terms of the pandemic. The level of infection in the community, the spread is very bad. And here's the point. We want to protect people now, because anybody we protect now is going to be around to get a vaccine in 4 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks. So we're so close to the finish line. And what I've been asking everybody, including friends and family who call me and say, well, can I just go do this? I'm tired of waiting. It's been such a terrible year. I get it. We're right at the finish line. And what I ask all of you is hang tough, wear your mask, avoid gatherings, including family gatherings at the holidays, which makes me feel like a Grinch saying it. But I promise that the upside will be, you'll get through it safely, and we'll all have a much, much better 2021. And I think that is something to look forward to. So Congresswoman, thank you again for your leadership in Washington, in all that you've done, and for the opportunity to speak with you throughout this whole year. And I hope we get to do more together in 21.
Oh, same here. I mean, look, you all heard it straight from the doctor himself. You know, the development of this vaccine is a huge step forward in the fight against this virus. And it's something for all of us to be very optimistic about, but we still have a long way to go until we're out of the woods. And that does mean that no matter how tired we are of this, we have to continue behaving responsibly and doing our part to stop the spread of this virus. And it's up to each of us to keep ourselves and others in our community safe. Dr. Jha, your generosity in sharing your expertise with all of us it's a gift. And I know that everyone watching deeply appreciates your willingness to take time to share your insights with us. So I want to thank you. And I want to thank everyone who tuned in. You know, staying informed and taking all the precautions are still the best tools we have to prevent the spread of COVID-19. So please keep doing what you're doing, wear your mask, maintain a safe social distance from others, make sure you're washing your hands regularly. You know, I know it's tough, but please, you know, have a smaller celebration than normal with just your immediate family, and those informal gatherings. We know how dangerous they are in the spread of this virus, so forego them. Please, one more time. And finally, as you spend time on social media, please continue to be wary of misinformation in your feeds and on your timelines. Depending on what folks are saying, the implications of sharing posts with bad information, it could be fatal, especially in the middle of this pandemic. So your vigilance online is just as important as it is when you leave your home for a trip to the grocery store or pick up dinner, when you support your favorite local restaurant. So I'll leave you these three words when it comes to your social media feeds. Consider the source. So thank you all again for tuning in this afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Jha. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay home if you can. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.